It feels like I have 50 pounds in my pocket right now because of all the change, because we have dollar papers, and so my pockets are very heavy. I'll remind you guys too, the Geek Out, the game show is right after this, so if you want to participate maybe, you can go to BriForum.com/quiz and take that quiz. So there's, I don't know, an hour and a half or so before we start that. So, which is what I was doing right before I ran up here, and what I will be doing as soon as I'm done. So it'll be nice to stand here and relax and present for a little bit. So this is doing it without VDI. The idea behind this is that, for the most part, we're just trying to manage desktops better than the way we are right now. And so the VDI companies and all the vendors associated with VDI are really happy to say, hey, you need to do VDI to do this, to manage your desktops better. And while it's true that you can use VDI to help manage your desktops better, if there's just a few goals, one-off here and there that you want to satisfy, there's plenty of other solutions you can do without actually doing VDI. So we're going to talk about that, some of the companies involved, things like that. First, though, you guys know me, I hope, from BriMadden.com. I'm Gabe Knuth. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, in the middle of the United States. And if you took your finger and pointed right in the middle of the US, that's where I live. If you've been to either coast, you've probably flown over Omaha, which is why they call it flyover country. And so if you've seen Omaha, it's been like this. Do you guys remember this picture? Have you ever seen this of Microsoft in 1978? I'm showing it to illustrate how long Brian and I have done this, because years ago, 99, 2000, somewhere in there, we had an intern working for us that had a $1,000 digital camera, because that was the cheap ones back then. And he also knew Photoshop a little bit. And one boring day in the summer, we decided to edit this picture. And so we added Brian up here, and this skinny, hairy guy over here is me. So back in 1999, Brian and I were working together doing this. And so it's been quite a while since then that we've been almost entirely focused on managing desktops one way or the other. So this session for me it's coming from a desktop management focus, not you have to do VDI, you have to do terminal server, you have to do whatever. This is all about satisfying goals. I write for BriMadden.com and also for ConsumerizeIT.com, although that's Jack's site for the most part. If you've seen Jack running around, he looks like skinny glasses Brian. So this is his baby, and he's been doing a hell of a job with that after only 8 months or so in the field. But I guess consumerization is so new that you can take a new guy and throw him in there. Brian mentioned the VDI Delusion book. There's actually a few of those floating around here. Quest has some that they're handing out, and we have a few that we're going to try to raffle off or something like that. Maybe we'll give them away tomorrow. So you may have a chance to get a hand on that if you want. This session here, we're going to go through three parts. The first is why are we here? Let's set up the problem, and then we'll dig into what can we do about it, or what are the things that VDI can do that we can also do without VDI. And then we'll talk a bit about who's actually doing this and how we can use some of that technology. It's pretty high level just because the use cases vary, so you can't get really specific with this stuff, but it's more about talking about the issues that are out there and how we can address some of them. So the first part, why are we here? And actually I should say, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and speak up. I have no problem getting interrupted. It's all in front of me, so I can get right back on track. We're here because in 2001, Windows XP came out. And that means that we've been using Windows XP for 12 years. I mean, that's the bulk of most of our IT careers probably has been spent with Windows XP. And we've been really, really good at managing Windows XP. We know it inside and out, right? This is something we've been doing it over and over again. We've gone through several of these refresh cycles, right? We assess our problems, we design them, we redeploy them, we maintain them, and then we retire those things or send them off to the DR site. And frankly, we've done this. If we have a 3-year PC refresh cycle, we've done that 4 times. We did it in 2001, again in 2004, 2007, 2010, and now we're looking at Windows 7. Brian showed this earlier. This is the way that we order PCs for the most part. It's call up Dell, order a pallet full of their second cheapest PCs, and they bring them to us. We don't want to be the guy that orders the cheapest one, so we just get the second cheapest. We're so good at this, though, that we know our Windows XP key by heart. Does anybody actually know it? Because I actually did at one point know my Windows XP key. Nobody knows or knew theirs? Okay, we got one. There's no shame. So all things changed though, right? And Microsoft decided to get past Windows XP, and they gave us Vista. And I wish I could show the entire picture here. This is only the bottom part. The top part shows the coal cars and some other cars falling out of this building. It's a great picture. But so they gave us Vista, but nobody went to it. Did anybody do anything with Vista besides install it, say this sucks, and then go right back to Windows XP? Anybody deploy it at all? Yeah, just a little bit? I was forced to. They tied your hands behind your back and said, you can't move. Oh man, 10,000 desktops, now I'll take a half an hour to boot. We did 100 and the pilot user said no. Oh really? Were they still your client after you deployed Vista? Okay. So we just went back to being awesome at doing Windows XP. Then Windows 7 comes out, and we think, hooray, Windows 7, it's not Vista. It has that going for it. It's faster, it's sleeker, it's more manageable, more flexible. It has all these enhancements to it. And we think, wow, that's really cool. Let's do that. And then we have to relearn. Now, what we didn't realize, we have to relearn things like profiles and application compatibility and IE6. There's a new HCL and all the UAC stuff and things like that. And we think, wow, that's a lot going on. This could actually be a good catalyst to go to VDI, because that's what everybody was saying, right? Even we were saying that because we thought, yeah, this will probably be good. Everybody has to go to Windows 7 anyway, so let's do VDI. With VDI, we're promised all sorts of things. We're promised security. We're promised manageability and agility, availability, faster installs, moves, adds, and changes. That's iMac. And it's going to save us money, or as we say, if I'm looking at that. And the problem, though, is that once you get in to start looking at VDI specifically, and the fact that you have to learn all of this new stuff with Windows 7, you realize that VDI is pretty hard. And so what a lot of organizations found out, unfortunately too late after they started projects, was that desktop Virt is not the same as server virtualization. You're not going to have the same success, because desktop virtualization is a lot more, wow, that was black on my screen. Okay, so this line here represents the complexity of desktop virtualization. This line here represents the complexity of server virtualization. And I'll try to prove that right, and maybe the slide will come back again and look normal. At least that one looks good. So servers are predictable, right? Server virtualization was super successful because we were able to take this and go down to this, because all of our servers pretty much are boring, predictable devices that we can set up, we can watch, and then we can plan for what host they belong to, what kind of resources they're going to consume, and they pretty much do the same thing day in and day out. Desktops, on the other hand, are completely random. They have all sorts of different use cases that we never had to worry about with server virtualization. We don't have to worry about things like application compatibility with servers. Terminal servers maybe, but the rest, not so much. 3D support, sysprepping, user data disks, link clones, disk streaming, boot storms and login storms, all of these things are things that we didn't have to worry about with server virtualization that we have to do with desktop virtualization. And so, all right, it works this time. So we can see where desktops are more complex than servers. And frankly, if all we needed to do was Windows and Office, it would be no problem. But we have all the other apps and things like that that we have to satisfy as well. So VDI turns out maybe not to be our answer at this point, especially as a catalyst to get to Windows 7. So we're deploying Windows 7 instead, and we're doing it the old-fashioned way, but that doesn't mean that we don't have goals still. And so I stole this slide from Sean Bass because he actually put the effort into isolating and finding all of these things and typing them out. The goals of desktop virtualization, for the most part, they boil down to these. Everybody has more that they can add on to it. But what we use to better manage our desktops is based on a selection of goals just like this one. And so when we look at this and we can see, all right, VDI can help us with most of these, and desktop virtualization in general can help us with all of them, we have to figure out how to bridge that gap. So if we can't do VDI, if we decided that VDI isn't in the cards for us, but we want something better than this, we got to figure out where that happy point is in the middle. Have you guys tried doing VDI and chosen not to do it, or are you still just leery about VDI, and so that's why you're looking for alternatives, or why are you here? Proof of concept? Okay, so a proof of concept that was too expensive when it scales up, that's really, really common. Not getting the costs and not getting that right and realizing all too late that it's too expensive, and then you wasted money on the proof of concept, and yeah. So that's kind of the frame of this. That's a common story that we hear all the time. There's other reasons too, like Microsoft licensing sneaks up on you later, or storage costs, or things like that too. That actually probably is part of the reason your costs went up, right? So this is our goal, is to find out where can we fit in some of these technology benefits without actually doing VDI and going through all that added complexity. So we'll hit the what can we do section here. If we go back to those goals, right? Like I said, VDI can solve a bunch of those things. But there's all sorts of other things too that are part of desktop virtualization that we can use. And I'm sure you guys already use terminal services. Maybe there's already some user environment management or app streaming, things like that. Maybe even client hypervisors. And there's other stuff outside of this range too. But a lot of times it's easy to forget amongst all the hype of VDI that all this other stuff is there too, ready to help. The first thing I want to look at, the first thing that we can do without having VDI is application virtualization. And that's these things, this ThinApp, Symantec, XenApp, AppV, Numesin, all of these things. And the application virtualization is, excuse me, allowing us to decouple the applications from the OS so that we can make that a little bit more portable. The user can take applications with them to different desktop delivery methods and things like that. The problem with it is that it doesn't work for everything. So I didn't realize this is actually like from the UK, isn't it? Is TNT a shipping company here? So not only does app virtualization not work with everything, you guys are smiling, do you work for TNT? Oh, right, yeah. No, you can't. So not only does application virtualization not work with every app, but all of the applications work differently. And so application virtualization is an option. Obviously, we know that. How many of you guys actually use some sort of AppV, ThinApp, some sort of application virtualization? So a lot of you already are doing this kind of thing. But remember, so VDI isn't the only thing. So we have all of, I'm sorry, I went backwards. Where'd it go? There we go. So the other part of the whole application virtualization, or getting the application separate from the OS, from living on the OS part of that image, is these self-service applications, right? If that one container was applications, now we have this app store where you can just go and pick your packages, your applications. And that can be deployed virtually, that can be deployed physically, those kinds of things. But we can get some of that flexibility that VDI is touted as having without actually doing VDI. Next up is user environment management. And basically, if this is application virtualization, then this is user environment management or user environment virtualization as well. Because now, not only are the applications in a container that we can move around, but so is the user environment. You guys using anything beyond stock Microsoft stuff? Are we using AppSense, RES, Sense, Medio, all of those things? Yeah. Basically, yeah, I mean, if you looked at it from a marketing perspective, it's a two-dog fight. There's AppSense and RES duking it out. RES, sorry. But there's so many other ones too. There's Medio and Sense, Triceret, Liquidware, Vume, that's Pierre Marmignon's virtual user environment manager that he released out to the community last year. And all of these things can help us with user environment management at some level. Now, with well, I should say, so what we have is some of these don't work with virtual machines though. So Liquidware, Sense, Immediate, Vume, AppSense, and RES, they work with physical desktops just as well. So they're sold at desktop virtualization conferences. They're at every desktop virtualization conference you go to. They work just fine on physical, traditional desktops. So there's no reason that you can't have user environment management or user virtualization on your traditional desktops, no problem. Those of you that have a solution like this, do you use them on your traditional desktops as well? Yeah. However, Triceret doesn't. They focused, for whatever reason, just on virtual desktops. So that's where, I'm not sure why, but if you're looking at this and you think, okay, we can use these extra management features, you can use those top guys, but for some reason, the Triceret solution won't work. If you want to do more than just the user environment management, which is to say the workspace, managing that, locking it down, managing the applications and things like that, you can go beyond that with the like privilege elevation, what do I want to say, secure data access, user installed apps of RES and AppSense and some other companies that have that sort of thing as well. So for most of us, user environment management and light user virtualization works well, but then we also could use this, the more advanced products out there. Oh, here they are. So, and we can't go too long talking about user environment virtualization without talking about UEV, because Microsoft announced this. It's still in beta right now. It's free in that it's part of MDOP, which is, or MDOP, which is a fancy way of saying you have to pay for it. Who has MDOP? Really? Just 2? That's not very many. So it's not free for anybody else. But it's still worth being in the conversation if you have that, because I mean, you can't ignore it, at least when you're evaluating solutions like this. So we have all of our other guys. We have Triceret. We can drop off of this list, obviously, since they only work on virtual desktops, and we're here because we don't want to use virtual desktops. And so we'll put UEV on that list as well. The way UEV works, incidentally, is it's a little bit like the Flex Profiles stuff of yesterday, where application settings are stored off to a file and then loaded at, not at boot like Flex Profiles was, but at application launch time is when those settings are pulled back in. And that allows you to couple just that specific application settings with the application. And in some ways, that's extremely powerful and extremely useful because we can compartmentalize the data to the application specifically. But the problem is that it only works for things inside the profile. So only files inside the profile and only registry settings inside the profile. And if you ask any one of these other guys what their thoughts are on UEV, they will unravel a scroll and list out to you all the different reasons that they're better. Next is encrypted OS images. This is, do you know the site Boing Boing? The website Boing Boing? I don't know if it's a US only thing or not. The guy that runs that website, though, he actually had this ring made for him. So he and his wife both have this ring as a wedding ring. And I don't know if they're super geeks or what, but maybe they send encoded messages to each other. In this situation, VDI has a big leg up, right? Because they can just encrypt the file. So it doesn't get any easier than just encrypting the file that contains the virtual machine. If you look at other ways to encrypt the disks, there's literally 51 different encryption packages out there, according to Wikipedia, at least. So there's probably another 50 on top of that. Rather than get into the obscure ones, though, I want to look at BitLocker real quick. Is anybody using BitLocker? Are you guys high security kind of locations or finance, or do you use BitLocker on all of your stuff? No, just a few things here and there? Okay. It all depends on whether the encryption is important to you or not as an organization. That is one of the selling points of VDI, though, is that they say, look, you can encrypt all these things and it just happens. And so if it's just there and it works, yeah, sure, why not? But if you don't need it, then like you guys already, you don't need it. But in a certain one-off situations like back there, BitLocker is free and part of the solution, or should be. The idea here, though, is that BitLocker came out with Windows Vista. But again, since nobody used Vista, nobody used BitLocker. Again, it's still there in Windows 7, but it's only for the enterprise and ultimate versions of Windows. I don't know, does anybody use Windows 7 Pro? I don't think so. Everybody's probably using Enterprise, right? Or Ultimate. Why pay for it, I guess, right? So the way this works, though, is there's an unencrypted boot partition which contains all the files that are just needed to boot. And then the actual OS and the applications and the data are contained in the encrypted OS portion of this. The process or the workflow that happens is the TPM, the Trusted Platform Module, on each desktop, each system, checks that unencrypted boot area at boot up to make sure that it hasn't been tampered with. It puts a signature on there when you first do the encryption. And if that hasn't been tampered with, it contains part of the key to get you into and boot up the OS. But you also have other options to add into that, like a PIN code, so that when you boot the thing up, you can type in a PIN. It then checks the TPM to see if they have access to the machine. And there's also a USB key option that, what I've read, nobody uses. Because if that USB key gets lost, anybody can log into it anyway. So the TPM plus the boot key or the PIN, any combination of those is okay as long as the TPM is part of it. The idea here, though, is there's a lot of moving parts for this. So disk encryption, it's actually kind of hard. And this is maybe one of those areas where VDI wins out. Just for the sake of simplicity. Now, you guys that are using BitLocker, you're using it because you have to have it in certain situations. And so it makes sense to go through that complexity. But you're not going to do this at scale unless you absolutely have to. One sort of middle ground solution, a compromise, I guess you could call it, is a client hypervisor. So you actually still get to load and run and execute the desktop on the machine, but it's there as a file. And so we get the VDI ability of encrypting just the file, but we get and we still get the local execution of the thing. Now, we have to trade off some of the experience of the client hypervisor and things like that, but I say it's just a compromise solution. Client hypervisors do help out with some of this other stuff, though, that we'll get into, but they're not, of course, the only thing. Files anywhere is a pretty hot topic with Dropbox and Box and ShareFile and all of these things. We can do files anywhere all sorts of different ways. And the fact of the matter is that as those things come out for consumers and the people are used to using them at home, we still need to be able to do that with our traditional desktops. So VDI lets you do this by way of, hey, you can access your VDI desktop anywhere, so now you can get your files anywhere. In this situation, though, we need to be able to do that for our desktops. And so AppSense has a couple of these. They have Data Now, which is their professional enterprise data synchronization app. And they have Data Locker, which is their AppSense Labs solution where you encrypt files and then store them in public areas like Dropbox. So the files are encrypted even though they're in unencrypted kind of Wild West space. RES has a solution, VMware Octopus, Citrix ShareFile, and then of course Dropbox and Box.net as well. The trick here though with the files anywhere is that if you want to get your users to use it, it's got to be really good. Because if I'm using Dropbox and you try to give me a solution that tells me and tell me that I have to use this and it sucks, I'm just going to go back to Dropbox or I'm going to find a different way to do it. And so what ends up happening is if it's not perfect, you get users that just hate IT. And so you need to be careful when trying to deploy a files anywhere solution because you've got all of these things, but if the users aren't happy and they're going back to Dropbox and they're using all of these different, or if they're putting all their corporate data out there in unencrypted land and you have no control over it, it actually becomes a liability for you and for the organization. So files anywhere is a tricky one. You can deal with it. You just have to do it right. Next is remote Windows applications, and it's kind of silly to have this one here, but if you listen to the marketing, you've got blinders on for VDI, remote Windows applications. We're talking Citrix stuff, right? We're talking XenApp or Terminal Server. You guys probably already use Terminal Server anyway, so this just kind of goes without saying. But there's an interesting use case for it. We know that we're trying to get off of Windows XP, although actually it's like this here, right? No line through the middle. We're trying to get off of Windows XP. Who still has Windows XP? Wow. Are you in the process of moving to Windows 7, or is something holding you up from actually starting that process? Okay. Started the process? A lot of people I talk to have issues with the applications. So there's still one or two apps that are holding them up so they can't even start the process, or some group of their PCs are stuck. And one of the things that we talk about pretty regularly is that the expiration date, excuse me, when Windows XP runs out of support is April 8th, 2014. And so we've got just under 2 years to actually do that. Windows Server 2003 R2, though, has a much longer, about 15 months longer, end of support date. And that means that if there are things that are holding you up from moving from Windows XP to Windows 7, and all the benefits that come with Windows 7 as far as manageability and flexibility and things like that go, you could feasibly move those applications to Windows Server 2003, even if it's on a one-to-one level and not a terminal services level. And that way you can get on with the Windows 7 migration and have another extra 15 months or so to get your application problems figured out. Next is bare metal provisioning. We've been doing bare metal provisioning now for quite a while, if you think about it. When you deploy your desktops, you set them on a lab bench, you fire up Ghost or Acronis or Altiris, and you deploy your images to them. And the idea here is that we can we can deploy to bare metal all we want. But the problem is it's still a pretty manual process, and if we can tweak that, that would be great. VDI offers that solution by saying, hey, you can use this single image and it just automatically deploys it out to things. And we can do that too with disk streaming solutions. And the biggest problem with that is that Citrix and DoubleTake both had solutions that were really similar to each other. But the only way you get Citrix provisioning services now is as part of Zen Desktop. So you used to be able to get the desktop edition of that and deploy desktops with provisioning services, but that's not the case for the last year or two. DoubleTake Flex was cool. DoubleTake got bought, and the Flex package, they just let it go. Dell actually OEM'd DoubleTake Flex. So at one point in time, we had 3 solutions out there. All 3 of those are not there anymore. That leaves Wise Workstation Manager. And they market this as a cloud PC solution because they have their Wise Cloud PC technology. And so when you see the marketing literature, you think maybe this thing only works for Wise stuff. But in reality, it actually works for all desktops. And this literally streams down the bits just like Provisioning Server does, so that you can have a stateless desktop. When they turn it on, the OS executes, runs, it all executes locally, but then when they turn it off, it's all gone. And I guess now that Dell has Wise, Dell WSM is going to be the moniker for it. So we can do bare metal provisioning now, even though we're not using VDI. Again, all of this stuff is a little bit more difficult, and especially if you start to combine them all together. But if you have a one-off need for bare metal provisioning in your organization, if that's the one thing you need to make your organization more well-managed, then there are solutions out there. Kind of a follow-up to that is the single OS images. And this is another thing that we've been doing for a long time. It's kind of a, what do I want to say? It's an arguable technique. But I used to work in an organization where the desktop team would image a piece of hardware, they'd load the drivers for it, take an image of that thing, grab another piece of hardware that's different, load that image on there, load more drivers on it, and again and again and again until they had one image that had all the drivers for 5 or 6 different machines. Do any of you guys do that? Or do you know if your organizations do it? Right, it sounds kind of crazy, right? Because then you'd have all sorts of issues. I don't know how they did it. It actually worked pretty well. But, what's that? Oh, okay.
And they give us the whole driver pack essentially. And when we boot our machines, we just boot from any hardware within reason. So if it's like cutting edge new, it's not going to work. The drive's not there.
Oh, I see.
So we have a single image that just goes out everywhere, and that handles that for us.
So this,
CCN coming in is kind of.
It was called UIU.
UIU, Universal Imaging Utility.
Oh, I see. So does it know what hardware then is? You actually put the image on it, or do you point it to UIU and UIU?
No, UIU puts all when you build the image just for the sysprep stage.
Okay.
You run UIU, your sysprep machine, and load up all the
Okay.
But once it's deployed, you don't have to worry about various hardware configurations.
And it's only using the drivers that it needs to be using then, rather than all of the drivers trying to load and step on each other. Okay. So there are UIU. We should add this to the presentation. So many changes to this in the last 24 hours because VMware bought Winova, and so that changes the talk a little bit later on here. So there are other solutions beside driver loading, thankfully, because I never really was all that sure of it, even when they were doing it successfully. So we can build on that whole bare metal provisioning thing, though, right? Because the bare metal provisioning gives us a little bit of a single OS capability, or we can use bare metal provisioning to help us get to single images. The thing is that there's still other options, like client hypervisors. Does anybody use a client hypervisor of any sort? The Nextops or kind of a few? That's actually more hands than I thought I would see. In this case, the client hypervisors, they're for the whitewashing of the hardware and things like that. And back, I guess, when did they come out? 2007, I think, is when we first started talking about client hypervisors and how we could use them. And when we first saw them, we thought, oh man, this is going to be great. We can do offline VDI. We can ship the same image that we use for our VDI down to the clients, and then if they want to access it with VDI, they can just ship it back up. And then we realized that, man, this is kind of hard because nobody wants to ship entire VMs across the network, right? It's crazy sounding, compiling these VMs with layers and all of this to get the user the user environment and the applications and the OS and all of that, and make that work from here. From on our client side to the server side, it's even if you could do it, it would be super complex. And so what we settled on was that it's just not practical. And so client hypervisors sort of languished for a while, and they needed to find their identity. And so you guys are maybe thinking like, I'm saying you should check out client hypervisors, and you guys are probably like, I thought we were over that now. The thing is that they've come a long way since then. And so we've got those type 1 client hypervisors, and the line's really blurring here between type 1 and type 2 now, but type 1 client hypervisors, they had to support USB devices and graphics cards and wireless and Ethernet cards, mobile chipsets, lid closures, battery status, all sorts of things that regular server class hypervisors don't have to do, and they had to do it all with a good user experience. And it took a long time for that to happen. And that whole time is when we also realized that offline VDI wasn't going to work. And then the type 2, they were always the easy button approach, right? Bam, now we have client hypervisors. And that's because the host OS did all the heavy lifting for that. They also have all emulated hardware. And so it took a while for the emulated hardware to get better to the point where we could actually use it and tell the users that this is an okay solution for them. So once all of this change happened, it kind of forced us to reevaluate what a client hypervisor was all about. And we realized that now a type 1, it's all about, it has direct hardware access. And that's really positive for us because now we can have a bit more control over the device as well. There's better security, and it allows us to do that whitewashing of the hardware, and that's how we get to the single image management portion. Because if you have this type 1 hypervisor that's meshed in really well with the hardware, then you can deploy a single image that actually performs really well. The problem, though, is that it's a destructive install, so you have to wipe the machine and then reinstall this, and sometimes you could P to V the existing machine and then copy that back on, but that's a pain in the neck, and that doesn't really help us. It just trades one complexity for another. The type 2s have device and host ignorance. They just don't care, it just runs, which is great. It also has a normal host UI and a non-destructive install. I skipped the weird host UI on the type 1. Zen client, Nextop, things like that. It looks kind of Linuxy, and users just want it to feel like home. Users don't want to know that they're using a client hypervisor. The problem with type 2 is that all that hardware is emulated. So even as good as it is now, it's still not perfect, and the performance still isn't going to be where we wanted it to be. Also, the unmanaged hosts are insecure. If there's a keylogger or something like that on the unmanaged host, it can watch what you're typing into the VM. What we realized, though, is that it's not offline VDI, it's about desktop management now. So now, instead of worrying about shipping VMs around and things like that, we look at the fact that we can whitewash the hardware, or we can deploy a VM to a device or a host completely ignorant of what the OS is. It could be Linux for all we care. excuse me, and it's all just about managing desktops, which is what we're all about anyway. And we also learned that it's about device management when it comes to the type 1 hypervisors, and we can actually get control of the hardware and manage our access to that through the hypervisor and through a VM running on that client. So in terms of single image management and bare metal provisioning, client hypervisors can help out in that regard. Those that are using them, is it a special use case like for developers or something like that, people that need to run multiple machines, or is it a more strategic approach? No? I thought somebody said they used them. Okay. So the next one is remote management. And this is in here for completeness' sake, because we can do this and we know how to do it. We use cloud services like go to my PC or go to Assist or log me in, things like that. Or we have in-house, every help desk application has its own remote management thing, Track It, and Dameware, PC Anywhere, all that kind of stuff. So this is just here for completeness' sake. Do you guys have Geek Squad in the UK? I was trying to find the equivalent. For us, if you go to the big box store like Maplin's or something, they have guys there that look just like this. They wear short sleeve shirts and they have ties on and they fix your computer. They look like nerds. And they charge you a lot of money. So patch management is another one that inexplicably, to me, is sold as a virtue of VDI. And I guess patch management, in a way, it makes sense because you can, if you're using single image, non-persistent VDI, one image to multiple users, I suppose if you patch that machine or that image one time, that makes it for a viable patch management solution. But when you have one-to-one VDI, like most deployments do, you still have to manage those devices just like they were one-to-one, or just like they were out on the floor. Because if it persists, if the user's session in their desktop persists between logoffs and shutdowns and restarts and all of that, then we're not touching that device. It's not building it from a shared image anymore. It may have originally come from a copied image, but once that happens, it becomes isolated from the packet. And we have a hard time deploying patches to it. So it sounds funny, but VMware actually went and bought Shavlik, the makers of HFNetCheck, the thing that I used to use when I had an internal IT job. So they bought Shavlik just so that they could patch servers. They actually made it part of vCenter so that now you can use the HFNetCheck or the Shavlik products to patch all of those one-to-one devices. They sell it as a server feature, but you need it for the desktops as well. So my point here is that unless you're doing shared image VDI, which you're probably not because that's where it costs a lot of money and that's where we've decided VDI probably isn't going to work for us anyway in some situations. The patch management solution you have right now is probably better than the one that you would get going with VDI. So, stay the course in that regard. The last thing, I'm sorry, the next section here is the who does this, and we can take our time here a bit. There's a lot to talk about because of VMware buying Winova and some of the other activity going on, Citrix buying Virtual Computer and things like that. So if we do wrap a little bit early, we can do Q&A and talk about the Winova acquisition and things like that. First thing I want to show is the UEM people that we talked about before. Liquidware, Sense, Immediate, virtualdesktops.info is that VUEM, V-U-E-M solution, and AppSense and RES, of course. And those guys are at the forefront of doing it without VDI because a lot of the stuff that you can get with them that you would normally do in a virtual desktop, you can use these guys to help manage the user's workspace and do user virtualization even for physical desktops. So these guys are a big part of that. But the other guys that are part of this too are guys like Citrix and VMware, and of course Winova now too. Mocha 5 is in there because of their layering technology, and then even Microsoft is part of this space, which actually we'll talk about them now. Microsoft is on the list because they have AppV and UEV. And you could say that based on their licensing situation, Microsoft is 100% committed to making it as difficult as possible to deploy VDI. So you can say without a doubt that Microsoft falls into the doing it without VDI category, because the less you do VDI, the more you're doing desktops, the more you're doing it the way that Microsoft apparently wants you to do it, because if they wanted you to deploy VDI, they'd make it a lot easier based on licensing. How many companies here have an anti-Microsoft policy, like only use Microsoft when you absolutely have to? Oh yeah? Are you for the UK government? I actually heard that the UK government is like that as well. Just Windows, just Office, leave the rest alone, shun Microsoft as much as possible. There's several companies in the US that have that policy too, and it's all because of the crazy licensing, and they just hate writing those giant checks to Microsoft for MDOP and for System Center and things like that. Next is Citrix here. And this is going to sound almost like a Citrix commercial, and the VMware thing might sound like a VMware commercial, but if you step back and look, they do a lot of stuff to help you manage the desktops better without ever doing VDI. They've got XenApp streaming to help with, to do the application virtualization. They really don't lead with that anymore. They usually lean on Microsoft for AppV, which I think is more along the lines of Microsoft saying, hey, you need to lead with AppV so we sell more MDOP licenses, and then we'll still be friends. So XenApp streaming is there, but AppV is what they lead with. But if you have XenApp, then you have XenApp streaming. Obviously, XenApp for remote Windows applications. They also have the Citrix receiver and storefront, and that's the App Store mentality. They announced that, or showed some stuff at Citrix Synergy 2 weeks ago in San Francisco that shows a receiver, an App Store being built into Citrix Receiver. And what this means really is that they also showed receivers' ability to deploy native applications for mobile devices, which is crazy cool. What it means, though, is that Citrix Receiver is becoming more than just the little client that you use to access your virtual desktop. Receiver is actually becoming a powerful thing that has things like follow me data and can secure the data and allow you to have that whole files anywhere solution, which is actually up here in a minute. And then Virtual Computer, which they just acquired, they had their own slide up until a week ago or so. Virtual Computer has the single image management, like we talked about with client hypervisors. And they do the encrypted disks because, again, all you have to do is encrypt that file. So two big benefits from client hypervisors that may make it worthwhile. If those are one or both things that you need, and that's it, client hypervisors might be the way to go in certain situations. And then, like I said, share file for files anywhere. The fact that that can be built into Receiver, and you can also use the device synchronization options for Mac and PC and for all the mobile devices, I think that's a pretty powerful feature, and that's a way to enable that. And you don't have to have anything really to use that, anything extra, or VDI. And then I guess they also have GoToAssist and GoToMyPC for remote management. Again, we've solved that problem though. VMware too now, especially with Winova, VMware's got a lot going for it as well. They've got ThinApp for application virtualization. They've got App Blast that they've shown for the remote Windows applications. Now for this, we're not entirely sure how this is going to work yet. We know that when they've shown that to us, they're coming from VDI sessions, but they just say it'll work with all sorts of things. So we may be able to do this on a one-off level where we don't have to do any crazy licensing. We may have to do it in terminal services. We're not entirely sure how it's going to work out, but they do have and are working on the ability to do remote Windows applications. VMware Horizon has the App Store and the self-service and things like that. Other people have the self-service too. RES and AppSense, I think, both have solutions. RES for sure. But this is a big deal. Horizon is so much more than that, than just being an app store and self-service apps. But it is something that you can do and take advantage of, especially if you're looking into cloud applications and things like that as well. And then, obviously, it's there waiting for you should you decide to start doing VDI and cloud desktops and things like that. And then, of course, the Winova stuff, which we'll talk about in just a little bit because I didn't feel like changing the deck that much. They offer the single image management, the user environment management, and bare metal provisioning, among other things, all in one package. It's super exciting to me, but like I said, we'll get there. I have to contain myself. And then they also have Octopus for files anywhere. So even VMware now is on board with that. And so they can provide you with this stuff as well. And again, we're not quite sure how that's going to be implemented yet, how you're going to access it or acquire it. But the fact that these things are all there and separate products right now means that these are all things you can do without ever touching a VDI desktop, even though these products are coming from VMware. And like I said, these products, we're kind of sitting in limbo, right? So we're just, some of us take a wait and see approach. We'll wait and, maybe VMware will release these things soon and we can use them. But there's other technologies and other tools that are out there available for us as well. So one of the things that the companies are doing as well is they just wait for a technology to grow up and mature and then go and acquire it like they did with Winova. It's not something, a lot of people, VMware acquiring Winova isn't something that people saw coming. We saw them maybe acquiring Unidesk or something like that, and a hardcore layering solution that's wholly based on ESX. So Winova is a bit surprising, but still cool nonetheless. We're gonna try to skip past this guy. Citrix and Virtual Computer and VMware and Winova. The other guy, the other one I want to talk about is Mocha 5, and they're still around and they're in this conversation because they have the layering. And this is another one that it's kind of surprising to us. I'm not sure why they haven't been picked up yet. But the idea behind them is that they use layering to enable all of those virtualization tactics, the application virtualization, the user virtualization. You guys familiar with layering? Because we can. All right, you're not. Good. So I can only have to skip past these. The 10 pence layering tour. Is that the actual, is it just a P for pence, or is there some funny character? Okay. I try to regionalize it. The idea behind layering, or the layer cake approach, is essentially we want to take our hardware and keep that as its own distinct layer. And then on top of that, we layer our operating system. And on top of that, we layer our applications. And on top of that, we layer our user workspace. And the idea here is that if we can do this individually, then we can manage them individually. The problem, though, is that Windows is no way built for this. Microsoft's idea of Windows, and I think Brian mentioned something along this line earlier in the keynote, was that monolithic Windows is the way that Windows is supposed to be. This is the container and everything exists here. We've spent our entire IT careers trying to make Windows do things that it wasn't supposed to do. So this is why we try to do layering. So the idea here, though, we have the hardware, we have the operating system layer, we have the applications layer, and we have the user workspace. And a successful layering solution allows you to just remove 2 of those layers and swap in 2 more layers. So we can take different applications and different hardware and combine them with the same operating system and the same user environment. And we can mix and match those things. And in a way, we look at that and we think, holy crap, this is the best solution I can think of. I mean, if you had that much flexibility, that would be great. You could do so much stuff. You could be so much more efficient with your desktop management. Like I said, the problem here is that Windows wasn't made for this. So all of these solutions, like I said, are essentially, and I don't take this the wrong way, especially if you work for a layering company, they're essentially hacking Windows. In the same way that we've been hacking Windows with terminal server and application compatibility and all those things that we do, it's supported the stuff that they're doing, but it's just making Windows do something it wasn't supposed to do. So they're all excellent hacking techniques. They're supported, they work well, but layering itself is just something that Windows isn't meant to do. The way that we have to do it, actually, is with virtualization. And so that's why layering has only come out in the last couple of years and been talked about a lot, is because we have the ability now to combine or to separate each of these different things into VMDKs or VHDs, into virtual disk files, and then we can combine them together at runtime to create the user's environment. That's where Winova comes in. And like I said, I can't hide it. I think that VMware buying them is brilliant, because they have what I believe to be the most comprehensive solution for all of this stuff on the market. Now, again, it's not going to solve all of the problems of your desktop management or anything like that. I just think that Winova has put the most thought into it as far as the layering solutions, the applications, the user environment, and all of this, and bare metal provisioning and such. Winova works with single images, so it's one image. It doesn't matter what hardware you deploy to, physical or virtual. Part of that comes patch management then as well. And of course, bare metal provisioning. Plus, they have the user environment management aspect of it, because again, they're using layering. And they even have a rollback functionality similar to that of client hypervisors, where you can, if the user makes a mistake, you can roll back just that messed up layer, or you can roll back the entire machine to the way it was before. So all this stuff is just kind of built into the product. And the coolest part, though, to me, is that that works on physical desktops too, and multiple different kinds at that. So the ability to take one image and deploy it to all of this different hardware without having to driver load that image, I think is incredible, and a very strategic move for VMware to go that route. VMware canceled their client hypervisor, VMware CVP, and I actually thought that was smart on their part, because they clearly didn't care enough about managing or getting into device or desktop management. They just want to be the virtualization guys. And so CVP is about executing stuff locally, even if it's in a VM form, and that's not VMware. But now, I'm starting to think that this makes sense for VMware to make this acquisition, because while you can deploy it to physical devices, you can also deploy it to virtual devices too, or virtual machines. And so now imagine going from, excuse me, imagine taking your single image and being able to deploy it to a physical machine when you are in the office, right? When the user's in the office. But you then can take that exact same image and deploy that to VDI, and it runs the same. It has the same apps, the same user environment, the same data, the same OS, and everything. It's the exact same image, and it moves in between them. And it streams in there as well. So it just copies the bits that it needs to run, and then it starts it up and copies the rest down in the background. So it's not like you have to wait for the VM to copy across the wire each time. And in this situation, going from the single image to VDI, it's no different than thin provisioning today. You still have to move those bits around, or other disk streaming solutions, I guess, today as well. So to me, what I hope to see is a extension to the View broker that eventually you log into that, and if you're in a situation where you can use VDI, it can go here. But if you're in a situation where you should just execute it locally because the local device has enough resources and it will provide the better experience, it just sends the image here. Winova, the fact that it all works on all of these different scenarios, to me, is just, it's amazing. So, on top of that too, if the user environment management portion of that isn't enough, right? Or if you still want to use user virtualization or even application virtualization or any of the other things that we've talked about to help manage desktops better, you can use these guys. You can still go out and get these solutions and use those with the Winova solution as well, or the client hypervisors, or the remote Windows application, terminal server applications, or just plain old physical desktops. And so if we look back at those goals, we can see that almost all, if not all of them, we have solutions for, that we can do without VDI. If you get to the point where you're trying to do, if you have one or two, that's fine. If one or two or three of these things is what's going to put you over the hump and make your desktop your desktop environment easier to manage, that's great. If you need more than that, if you start needing a whole column, then maybe VDI is the way to go, or a whole desktop virtualization suite. But if we're just on the brink of a really well managed desktop environment, we can do that without the VDI. For instance, if we want to be hardware agnostic, right, we can use the client hypervisor to do that, or the Winova piece, or the driver loading, or Wise workstation manager, that sort of thing. Or if we go back, we can also do supporting OS migrations, right? For that, user environment management is really helpful with that. Part of the deal with user environment management is that it can help us get from Windows 7 to or from Windows XP to Windows 7. The profiles changing in there is pretty disruptive. Are you guys, when you do the migration from Windows XP to Windows 7, are you just doing this rip it out of the old profile and stick it into the new one, or are you using tools to help you migrate from one profile type to the other? AppSense? That's what most are, and I mean, all of those other solutions have some sort of play in that space. Some allow you to just go one way. A lot of the XP migration products out there that are just focused on migrations only allow you to go from Windows XP to Windows 7, and some of the other ones allow you to go back and forth. Wise Workstation Manager Sorry, Brian and I are both fighting colds, I think, a little bit. So, Wise Workstation Manager obviously can help with the OS migrations as well, because if you have all these pieces of hardware out there that are running Windows XP, and their recent hardware, obviously we can't take older stuff, but recent stuff that can run Windows 7, you could use that Wise WSM to do it. Instead, you load your Windows 7 image into Workstation Manager and then deploy it that way. Obviously, you still have all the other issues to handle that the user environment virtualization would help with. And this one looks like it's going to fall off the screen, but XenApp or terminal services for incompatible applications, like I talked about before with Server 2003 and the extended time that it has, or that it gives you to get those applications working. That can help you as well. And Winova even too. I feel like it's a Winova commercial now. But I promise it's not. I like them on purpose. So a few takeaways from this guy. We'll have a few minutes here for Q&A. You're not alone with this, right? I mean, there's a bunch of people in the room here that are not entirely sold on VDI or tried VDI and failed at it for one reason or another. Most of the time it's cost. Sometimes it's politics. Sometimes it's believing in the cost models. I don't know if Brian wrote an article about how to lie with cost models years ago, and I think he had 5 or 6 reasons initially. Now there's something on the order of 12 or 13. There's a whole chapter in our book about how to lie with cost models. It's that scary. My favorite way to lie with a cost model is soft cost, by the way. So sometimes you'll talk to people and they'll say, oh, so every help desk call costs you $200, and you can save 10 help desk calls a day by deploying VDI. And now all of a sudden in the cost model, now you're saving $2,000 a day by deploying VDI. Cost models are scary. So believing those, that's one of the reasons that VDI projects fail a lot. So just know you're not alone with any of this. Takeaway number 2 is that you have to remember those goals, because if you look at VDI and you think we need to do this, we have to do this, our desktop management just isn't going to be right unless we do this. Take a step back and figure out exactly what you're trying to do by getting VDI. And if you're only trying to get 1 or 2 of these things, maybe it makes sense to skip the complexity and the cost associated with that and just go with a one-off solution or 2 that can help get you there. Or in some cases, like I said, there's Citrix solutions, VMware solutions that can actually get you there, that are with just one solution that has multiple features as well. And the third takeaway is to look at all those alternatives. Like I said, the Citrix and the VMware. Don't count out UEV from Microsoft, even if I guess if you don't have MDOP, you can count it out, because there's no sense, I think, paying for it, because you'd have to buy something anyway, so you might as well buy something that's better. But if you have it and it's free-ish, then you can go ahead and use it as well. I talked like Sean Bass, so I'm done. And if you've seen a Sean Bass session, he talks really fast. So we can turn this into Q&A now if you want. Yeah, thanks for coming. So, you guys have any questions? Yeah.
You talked about UEV from Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
It's the initial release, so some kind of public beta.
Mm-hmm.
How will it fit in a compression like Absence or RES or something like this?
How will it what? I'm sorry, the door was closing.
How could it become paired with
Oh, okay.
Absence or something like this?
You mean what do they have to add to make it comparable to AppSense, or how does it compare right now?
Can it do the same like?
Okay. So AppSense and RES specifically have very complex tools that can do so much more than UEV can do. Like I said, so UEV, I mentioned it works like Flex profiles, and the way the login stuff works is really close to Flex in that when a user logs in, it reads their configurations from a file and then places those configuration settings in before presenting the interface to the user. And then when they log off, those changes are committed to a file again, and that file is stored in a centralized location so that it is accessible wherever they boot from. The application part of UEV is application specific. So if I start Word, for instance, it will, or Office, I guess, in general, it will call that same profiling application that watches for changes and only commit those specific changes to a separate file so that every time I launch an Office application, it loads those preferences in. So, and in the case of, that's helpful with application virtualization, because if I virtualize Office, for instance, no matter where I go and access that Office, be it a physical desktop or a terminal server session or a VDI session, those applications, or those configurations and settings follow the application around. AppSense, RES, Immediate, Sense, all of those guys, they all have solutions that can do something along those lines, and so much more than that. Where they get complex because they have so much more ability to, and I don't mean complex in a bad way, maybe comprehensive is probably the better way to say it. They have a lot more centralized control over all of those settings in the user experience. Plus, RES has their app store. I believe they both have privilege elevation so that you can keep your users in the user's local group and just give them the ability to elevate certain processes to administrator or power user status, and that way you don't have to make your users administrator. How many people have users as administrators on their local machine? Some. That's actually the fewest amount of hands I've ever seen in a room with 30 people in it. Maybe you guys are better about that over here. Lazy US or something. So hopefully that answers your question. They're a lot more comprehensive. It's just, UEV to me is almost a replacement for roaming profiles. So you can still use those other solutions out there, but this way you don't have to worry about profile corruption when you can have the application-specific data with the application. You don't have to worry about profile corruption, and you don't have to worry about loading profiles on terminal servers that, if you connect to Word running on a terminal server, you've got to load the entire profile to get all of those settings. So anything else that's in the profile is also loaded. In this case, with UEV, if you load Word on a terminal server session, only the Word configuration is there.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Other questions, comments? Yeah, in the back.
Isn't the good old server-based computing not the solution for almost all the things you mentioned?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. If it works for you, go for it.
Server-based computing and a user environment manager, and you're mostly done, right?
Yeah, so there's the, Brian is the opinionated one of the two of us, and the one that doesn't mind going out and making wild proclamations, and he came up with Madden's paradox, and it's one of a few, saying that if your environment is simple enough for single image or non-persistent VDI, that you might as well just use terminal services. And you're absolutely right. Instead of VDI, in a lot of situations, terminal services is all right. And what I'll say is that if terminal services is solving all of your issues today, if you don't want anything more, any more of the isolation, I guess, and some of the advantages that you would get with VDI, if terminal services meets all of your needs, there's no reason to stop using it. You'll never, the fact that VDI is getting cheaper, as they say, and that probably is true, but at the same time, it runs on the same hardware as terminal server, so terminal server is getting cheaper as well. And so there's always going to be a really big gap in density and cost between the two. All the storage requirements are different and all of that. So yeah, absolutely. If you have terminal server and it works for you, no reason to skip it.
Yeah, so this is mainly if organizations are using clients now, as normal clients,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to go to a new strategy, then they should choose between VDI or server-based computing, for example. But if you're already on server-based computing, it's a lot of these things are already solved.
Oh yeah, and this presentation is specifically about how you can avoid going to VDI if you don't need to. Because a lot of organizations aren't 100% terminal services, just like way more organizations aren't 100% VDI. So if terminal services is in your environment and it works really well now, keep using it. And if you want to add some of that flexibility to your physical desktops, your traditional desktops that you also have to manage, then there are all sorts of ways to do that. And so if you're going into it looking for a user environment management or a user virtualization solution that you can use across the board, for instance, you would not pick Triceret because Triceret works only on virtual desktops. And if you want to have those features on your physical desktops as well, you would deploy one of the more comprehensive solutions. Anything else? All right. Thanks, everybody.